Welcome back to our Firestop coffee break training. You may have heard that before I was in the Firestop industry, I used to teach kindergarten. As you can imagine, we told a lot of stories in kindergarten. Do you remember any stories from when you were a kid that impacted how you relate to other things? Other people, other scenarios, different situations? Stories have a unique way of bringing things to life, and I hope that's what this one does. Both in how easy it is for people to misunderstand the right way to do things, and maybe even in a way that you can support others as they make their way along this journey of learning more about all this crazy Firestop stuff. For this story, there are 3 characters I want to introduce you to. The Firestop detail that we'll be discussing, the Firestop installer, and then the 3rd character in our story was me. In this story, I was the QA/QC person in charge of making sure that the passive fire protection installations conformed with the submitted details, among other things. Our next character was a guy named Robert. He was the Firestop installer that I was dealing with. Now, Robert's a good guy, very open about his past mistakes and how he's working to make some amazing changes in his life. He was a good man, and we got along famously. He wanted to do things right, and he was eager to learn. He took a great deal of pride in his work. Now, Robert was a big guy. If you and I have met, then you know I'm only 5'4¼ I know, I'm short. Robert was not. He was a big guy, but big in every way. Not fat, but definitely formidable. Both in the way he simply stood, as well as in the way that he spoke. I mean, if he got mad, nobody had to guess about it, if you know what I mean. That was Robert. Next up is our Firestop detail. The application that we were dealing with was the gap between the edge of the floor slab and the exterior facade. This installation is complex for many reasons, and eventually we'll have a training series that addresses all of those complexities. But for this discussion, we're only going to be talking about the mineral wool safing insulation, and specifically the stuff that's installed between the fenestration system and the edge of the concrete floor. You likely know that this Firestop application has to have a tested and listed detail, but in this case, there were no Firestop details that matched our field conditions, so we were working off of an engineering judgment, or an EJ. This EJ allowed for a maximum 6-inch joint, but where we started was only 4 inches. So one important part of our Firestop detail that you need to know about for this discussion is that the EJ we were working with called for 50% compression. Okay, so I have a confession to make. I hate details that call for 50% compression. I hate them, and you're about to understand why. We already said that the joint is 4 inches wide, so I asked Robert, how is he getting his 50% compression? And he was more than happy to show me. The mineral wool comes in bats that are 4 inches thick. So he cut pieces 4 inches long, 4 inches high, and 4 inches wide. The Firestop detail wanted 4-inch depth of mineral wool in the joint, so that sounds like it'll work. He had the orientation right. He had the cut edge of the mineral wool into the opening. Then he would take one 4-inch section and pair it with another 4-inch segment that he cut in half. So here's his math. 50% of 4 is 2. So 4 plus 2 is 6, and one 4-inch segment and half of a 4-inch segment would give him 6 inches of mineral wool, compressed and pushed into the opening. The problem is, that gives you, well, not 50%, it gives you 33%. Let me explain. If you have 6 inches of mineral wool and you compress it 50%, half of 6, or 50% of 6, is 3. So when you slide that mineral wool into the 4-inch joint, it expands and fills the 4-inch space. And then what happens? Your 6 inches of mineral wool would be compressed at 33%, not 50%. I gotta tell you, as much as I like Robert, I was exhausted when I walked away because either his brain switched off all ability to comprehend math, or maybe my brain switched off all ability to communicate. Because it didn't matter what I said to him, the message was not getting through. We left it with him agreeing to talk to his boss, because in my role as quality control, I was not allowed to direct work. The next day, I went back and we talked again. It was clear at this point that his boss was much better able to communicate the message than I was the day before, and now he got it. He could see that if you have a 4-inch joint, you need to take 8 inches of mineral wool, compress it 50%, and install it into the opening in order to comply with the requirements of our Firestop detail saying that we need to have 50% compression. That means he needs to take 2 4x4 pieces of mineral wool, compress them both together, and slide them into the opening. That means when I inspect it, I expect to see a seam right between those two pieces. It should be centered in the opening, right? But it wasn't. So, what was going on? Now, keep in mind, Robert is a good guy. I know I said that before, but it's important to understand that in this story. This guy seriously takes pride in doing quality work. So I know he's not trying to cut corners or cheat the system. He explained to me that when he tried to take 2 sections of 4x4 blocks of mineral wool, squish it into the opening, it was way too hard to do. He just couldn't keep up with the lineal foot requirements that his boss said that he had to get. So he was so excited to tell me he found a way around it. Again, this guy's not trying to cut corners in any way. The Firestop detail called for a minimum 4 PCF density mineral wool. So he brought 8 PCF mineral wool. He cut 4x4 strips and installed that into the opening. He thought that the compression of the mineral wool would change if he used a different density. The mistake he made was thinking that the compression of the mineral wool was required as part of the mechanism to prevent the passage of fire, or maybe the thermal transfer that we talked about in ASTM E119, which is how our fire-rated assemblies are tested. Now, let's be clear. That is the exact role of mineral wool, stopping the thermal transfer, maintaining the T rating in the fire-rated joints, protecting the sealant or the spray on the non-fire side. But the compression, it's not required to prevent the thermal transfer. I'll explain that further when we talk about mineral wool density, but for now, I want to stick to this story. This new solution was so easy for him to install, and he was getting even better lineal footage on his installation. He was so proud of himself that it broke my heart to have to tell him for the 2nd day in a row he was wrong. But I had to. I had to be sure that the installation was capable of working the way it was designed. I had to make sure that the life safety systems could function properly for the life of the building. Robert understood the importance of the orientation of the mineral wool because I told him the story about the straws. He thought he had the compression right. And when he learned how to do it right, he quickly learned how difficult it was to install 50% compression, which is why I hate it. I'll tell you, whenever a detail calls for 50% compression, there's a 95% chance that the installation is wrong. There are a handful of specialty contractors who are going to get this right, and they'll do it right without having to be told. But right now, in my own personal experience, the majority of installers simply don't know. Then there are the dirtbags that don't care, and I've got no time for those crews. But if you are doing it right, congratulations. If you're one of the good guys who wants to do it right, I commend you for being here and for learning what it takes. Who'd have thought that there was so much to look at when you're talking about mineral wool in Firestop applications? It's crazy, huh? So join us in the next few videos and we'll explain more about compression, density, and I'll even tell you a few secrets that will help you get this stuff right. So we'll see you on your next coffee break.